Hi, everyone, and welcome to Utility Safety In-Depth, where we take a deeper dive into topics recently covered in Incident Prevention magazine. I'm Kate Wade, the editor of Incident Prevention, and your host for this podcast. In this episode, we sit down with Jim Willis, who wrote a feature article titled Strengthening the Substation Fence for the June-July issue of Incident Prevention. Jim is the CEO of InDev Tactical, a security training and consulting firm, and has more than 40 years of experience working with electric power utilities and infrastructure security. Welcome to the podcast, Jim.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for being here. Before we dive right in, can you tell our listeners a little bit about your background and how you came to start your own security training and consulting firm?
Yeah, I started out, I got out of the Navy as a second-generation lineman, about 40 miles off the Gulf Coast. Very quickly realized I was going to work when everybody else was going inside during thunderstorms, et cetera. So I got a degree in engineering, went into engineering side of the utility sector. Worked there for many years for different utilities, distribution and transmission power utilities. Wound up at NRECA's international programs for about 10 years through the late 90s, early 2000s. And then, over the period of time, I worked in a number of countries. I was more of their special projects person, so I wound up doing a lot of initial startup stuff in investigation programs, and I wound up doing a lot of the security work, and I slowly but surely began to focus more and more on security of utilities. Started my own firm in 2004 called InDev Tactical, and since then we have worked across the globe with a number of different groups, power utilities, gas, water, telecom groups. And our focus has been on utilities and security and how they tie together. And my background in security, I've had a affinity, but also my formal trainings include coursework with Defense Security Service, U.S. DOD, the UN Security Division. And like I said, I focus primarily on dealing with utilities and how utilities are vulnerable to attack.
Very good. Thank you. So at the beginning of the article that you wrote, you referenced the attack on Pacific Gas and Electric's Metcalfe transmission substation in 2013. Can you talk a little bit about that incident and how attacks on electric utility infrastructure have evolved since then?
All right. Yeah, like you said, April 16th, 2013, PG&E's Metcalfe station, which is just outside of San Jose, was attacked in the middle of the night. Attack took about 45 minutes. It was well orchestrated. They had obviously surveilled it well. They started out by cutting the communication cable. They, for about 45 minutes, fired on the substation. They damaged 16 transformers, spilled about 52,000 gallons of oil, and caused about $15 million in damage. They broke off the attack as they began to hear the sound of law enforcement approaching. They've never been identified. They have no clue who pulled off the attack. So immediately following that, the U.S. government began to realize just how vulnerable the U.S. utility system is. So they began to put into place several different procedures focused on bulk power. This is where they saw the biggest threat, because if Metcalfe attack had succeeded in knocking out just about one more transformer, it would have created a cascading failure that would have basically reached the Rockies. And they realized the vulnerability of the bulk power system, and almost all the focus since then has been on protecting the bulk power supply, which is 230 kV and above. We had in 2014, FERC came out with the first physical security reliability standards. It moved on to about 2015. We wound up with what they call the SIP 14.2 standards. But again, this is protection of the bulk power system, 230 kV and above, anything that would basically make a large sustained outage, because they felt that that's where the attacks would take place.
Okay. Well, so you talk about this accelerationist handbook in the article that you wrote, and that began circulating last year in 2022. Can you talk more about the handbook, like what's included in it, what kinds of individuals and groups are reading in it and acting on its contents?
All right. It's, in, I think it was January of last year, it began to gain some traction. And then by June, July, it really hit the the internet hard, and they put it's about a 14, 15 page document that basically, it starts out with the head. If I'm sitting there looking at it, it says, "Make It Count, a guide to the 21st century accelerationist." It's might help if to understand what accelerationists are. Accelerationists are extreme terrorist or activist groups that their goal is to create the circumstances for the acceleration of the downfall of the U.S. Western governments, not just the U.S., but Western governments. It actually started in Europe back in the early 20th century and has been around ever since. It focuses on what this particular document does. It tells people how to take the attack, such as the Metcalf Station attack, and go further on, bring it further down the chain. Instead of trying to attack a large bulk power system, it advocates attacking small, rural, and isolated, medium-sized, and small utilities, whether it's gas, water, power system, telecommunication, anything to harass citizens of the nation and create a disruption in the quality of life that we have at this time. And that is one of the things that they actually promote is, they want to disrupt the quality of life. By doing that, they think they can create enough conflict to accelerate the downfall of the government. And they then give step-by-step instructions on how to do it. That basically a couple of guys with a pickup and a deer rifle can create a tremendous amount of damage, and it doesn't have to be a sophisticated attack such as the one at Metcalf.
Well, so how much of a threat are these new types of attacks? Is there any kind of like statistics or other data to draw from?
Yeah, there's some of it. I get a lot of intelligence reports. I can't discuss all of them, but I can kind of give you the feel for them. The intelligence reports have shown that the attacks since this came out last year have accelerated to the point we're at about I'm trying to look at the number here, 115% in the last year they've increased. In 2022, there were 648 recorded events. Now, that doesn't include those that just somebody repaired and didn't bother sending in the information on. This is ballistic damage. This is just, this is people that are trying to shoot up the stations. Most of them, luckily, did not cause great damage, but some of them did. It's really beginning to take hold and begin to move forward, especially we see like in North Carolina last fall, we had the incidents that was quickly copied across the country. Even those that do not use the internet, the dark web sites for like the accelerationists, begin to copycat and to begin to create, this is a way of doing it. Let's go and try to do it. Some of them do it for ideological reasons. Some of them just because they like to create confusion and conflict.
Well, so you state in the article that no matter a company's organizational structure, size, operational function, or location, this new strategy represents a genuine and enhanced threat to your system. And then you go on to say that the enhanced danger stems from the exploitation of three existing but generally ignored issues, which are people, vulnerability recognition, and replacement shortages. Can you elaborate on those three issues?
Yeah, we can. The first is people. People are, we don't know how people will respond, or people are you can't determine exactly what some will or will not do, and who is going to be influenced by the actions of other people. People are emotional. They're
irrational, illogical.
Exactly right. It's trying to think of the right term to try to describe it without being ugly. It can be somewhat, and they seldom consider the consequences of their actions. People will do sometimes attacks up until the last 24 months or so. Most attacks were just random acts of stupidity by someone with a weapon or some type of device, not considering the consequences of their actions. In the last few months, as this accelerationist handbook has come out and more people are taking political sides, the actions are much more methodical. And it's It's being carried out with intent on doing harm.
Mm-hmm.
But you cannot, and like I said, people are irrational, and they will do things that absolutely do not make sense. I was, for example, I was going to Georgia back to do a training program in Gainesville back in March, and 2 days before I showed up, 2 people got inside of a substation and were electrocuted. They were that was a theft issue. Theft is still a big problem for utilities, especially with substations. People think copper is valuable, and it is valuable, but it's not worth getting killed over. It's the type thing that happens because you do not know how someone's going to respond. So that's the problem with people, and people can be urged to do things they would, and better circumstances would not do if they had time to really think about it and did not allow their emotions to take over or their ideological goals to supersede the idea that they're human and they can do be damaged and do damage. When it comes to vulnerability, this has been the best unkept secret in America, and that's the fact that the utilities are vulnerable. There's absolutely no way to protect them. When I say that, you have miles and miles of distribution line, transmission line, gas line, water lines, and we know that you cannot have someone guarding it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 100%. That you have to be realistic on where and what we do. Now, luckily, up until now, we have gotten away with being with very simplistic approaches to security because people haven't acted on this vulnerability. But now things have changed with these manifestos coming out, and this manifesto is not the only thing that comes out. Almost every week, something new comes out about attacking the infrastructure, both here in Europe, Asia, across the globe. But they see these activists and extremists see these things, and they say, well, that makes sense. Let's go try it. And it's not one group. It's not like going back to the accelerationists. The accelerationists aren't all left-wing. They're not all right-wing. That is just their idea to create the downfall of the Western society. So you have it on both this philosophy permeating throughout the extremist communities, left-wing, right-wing, you name it, whatever. One group that's picked up on it since it began since the original manifesto came out has been eco-fascists, they call themselves, and that's people who would take extreme actions to help save the environment. These are all people that now have realized that these things are vulnerable, and they can usually do a simple attack without too much fear being caught. So that's the vulnerability issue. The replacement issue, as far as utilities, anyone in the utility industry knows that right now, insulators, transformers, other critical gear, the lead time on a substation power transformer can be up to 5 years right now. It's
wow.
Yeah, it's the backlog, and this has just been due to regulation, the economics, regulation, tightening down on industries, consolidation of and loss of manufacturing capability, and it's really creating a problem. So someone may have 1 or 2 standby or replacement transformers, but if you get 2 or 3 of these attacks, then suddenly you can be in a real critical situation.
Mm-hmm. Well, so we know that even one attack can cause problems for a utility company and its personnel. What kind of things can companies do to proactively protect their infrastructure?
Well, you need to take a long, hard look at your infrastructure and get the right people to look at it. Bring your team together, pull together a team, not just your safety group, but you need your safety group, your engineers, your operations people. Then pull in outside support and resources such as your local law enforcement, but also bring in a security practitioner that does this, that focuses on these issues, because they'll find gaps, and then do a vulnerability study and look at your infrastructure, decide what is the critical pieces we need to protect, and then begin to focus on that area. What are the things that if we lose this substation or this critical junction pole or this other device, a piece of equipment, it would create a sustained and a devastating outage and create a chaotic situation for us, and then begin to focus on what can we do for that specific site to increase security. It's more than just the fences. I mean, the fences is part of it, but even that, we've done a very lackadaisical, for lack of a better term, approach to that. I mean, we use fences that are easily breached, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to do it. So we need to make it much more difficult. We need to begin to increase our surveillance of our own stations. Do not depend on one technology. Don't depend on just cameras. Don't depend on just any one thing, sensors on the fences or sensors around the system. That it takes a combination of differing resources that are blended together at the specific site, because each site will be different. And surveillance. So make sure you, one of the greatest things you can do is begin to have your local community begin to help pay attention to who's around your substations. Now, you don't want them to act on it. You don't want them to confront people. But if they see someone surveilling a station, see someone running a drone over the top of one, something of that nature, you see someone driving around it off once or twice, these things need to, if they get reported, then you can begin to increase your corporate surveillance of that particular station, knowing that almost all attacks are preceded by surveillance.
Well, so I think we've covered a lot of important information here today, and I want to thank you so much for all your insight. Before we close out this episode of the podcast, is there anything else you feel like it's important to mention?
Well, the one thing is take it seriously. It is, we're tasked with providing as secure an environment as we can for our employees, for our customers, our members, if whatever the people we're serving, and protecting our assets, which includes people, again, and our people we're serving, and the equipment itself. Realize that it is a problem, and it is a growing problem that will not go away. I've seen these tactics over the years, the many different war zones I've worked in, and I don't think I mentioned it, but I spent about 6.5, almost 7 years in Afghanistan over a 12-year period, working with rebuilding the utilities. And one of the things I've recognized in these attacks is this is basically guerrilla warfare. These are guerrilla warfare tactics that are basically coming home to us, and we need to be aware of it. We need to be able to respond quickly. And mitigation is what you're looking for. How can we stop? Someone who's intent on doing damage will almost always succeed to some level. What we need to do is try to deter it, but if it does take place, be able to mitigate it very quickly and limit the amount of damage they can actually do.
Well, again, I want to thank you so much for your time today. And as a reminder to our listeners, Jim's article on strengthening the substation fence is now available in the June-July issue of Incident Prevention, which can be accessed online at incident-prevention.com. Until next time, stay safe and be well. The views, information, and opinions expressed during this podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Utility Business Media and its employees. It is strongly recommended that you discuss any actions or policy changes with your company management prior to implementation.